The wrench slipped from David's oil-stained fingers as the elderly woman's trembling hand gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Her cloudy blue eyes widened in recognition, searching his face like she was seeing a ghost. "You have my son's eyes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of traffic. Behind them, the billionaire CEO, who had been watching this interaction with growing unease, suddenly swayed, her face draining of all color. What started as a simple car repair was about to unravel a 15-year-old secret that would change 3 lives forever. But which one of them was hiding the truth that would destroy everything they thought they knew about family? The afternoon sun filtered through the grimy windows of Carter's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where David Carter worked beneath the hood of an old Honda Civic. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, each motion economical and sure. At 35, he had the kind of quiet competence that came from 15 years of fixing things that other people had given up on. The garage smelled of motor oil and possibility, a scent that had become as familiar to him as his own skin. In the corner of the shop, 7-year-old Lily sat cross-legged on a worn tire, her math homework spread across a piece of cardboard balanced on her knees. She hummed softly to herself, occasionally glancing up to watch her father work. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days, and her clothes were clean but clearly hand-me-downs. Despite their modest circumstances, there was something luminous about the child, an intelligence that sparkled in her green eyes and a warmth that seemed to brighten the entire garage. David wiped his hands on a rag and called over to her. "How's that homework coming along, kiddo?" "Almost done, Dad," Lily replied, not looking up from her work. "Mrs. Peterson says I'm the best in my class at story problems." "That's my girl," David said, pride evident in his voice. He returned to the engine, but his mind wandered as it often did these days to the bills piling up on his kitchen table and the conversation he'd had with Lily's teacher about the school's science camp. $47 short of being able to afford it, and $47 might as well have been 47,000. He pushed the thought away and focused on the task at hand. The Honda needed a new timing belt, and Mrs. Patterson needed her car back by tomorrow morning. The bell above the garage door chimed, and David looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the late afternoon light. As his eyes adjusted, he realized he was looking at a woman in an expensive navy blazer and perfectly pressed slacks. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and she wore the kind of jewelry that suggested money wasn't a concern in her life. She seemed to hesitate at the threshold, as if she wasn't entirely sure she was in the right place. "Can I help you, Mom?" David asked, straightening up and reaching for a cleaner rag to wipe his hands. The woman stepped into the garage, her heels clicking against the concrete. "I hope so," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I'm Sophia Wellington. My car broke down about a mile from here, and I had it towed. The mechanic at the main dealership said you were the best in town for foreign imports." David nodded toward the pristine black Mercedes sitting in his driveway. "That yours?" "Yes. It just died on me completely. No warning. Nothing." "I'll take a look," David said, grabbing his diagnostic tools. As he approached the Mercedes, he was acutely aware of the difference between this car and every other vehicle that had ever entered his garage. The leather interior alone probably cost more than he made in 6 months. "Mind if I ask what you were doing in this neighborhood?" Sophia seemed to consider the question carefully. "I was driving back from a meeting and took a wrong turn. GPS led me down some back roads I'd never seen before." She paused, watching as David connected his diagnostic equipment. "I've lived in this city for 20 years, and I had no idea places like this existed." There was something in her tone that made David look up from the engine. It wasn't condescension exactly, but rather a kind of wonder that seemed genuine. "Different world out here," he said simply. "Different how?" David gestured around the garage. People know each other. They help each other out. Your neighbor's kid plays with your kid. You fix someone's car. They bring you homemade cookies. He smiled slightly. Of course, they also know your business whether you want them to or not. Sophia's gaze drifted to Lily, who was now watching the adults with undisguised curiosity. Is that your daughter? Yeah, that's Lily. Say hello, sweetheart. Lily waved shyly from her makeshift desk. Hi, lady in the fancy clothes. Sophia laughed, and the sound seemed to surprise her. Hello, Lily, I'm Sophia. That's quite a homework setup you have there. Dad says making do with what you have builds character. Lily replied matter-of-factly. What's character mean exactly? It means being yourself, even when things get tough. Sophia said, crouching down to Lily's level. What are you working on? Math problems. Want to see? This one's really hard. Lily held up her paper with evident pride. If Sarah has 12 apples and gives away 4 to her friends, then buys 6 more at the store, how many does she have? Sophia studied the problem with mock seriousness. Well, let's see. She started with 12, gave away 4, so that's 8 left. Then she bought 6 more, so 8 plus 6 is 14. Is that what you got? Yep, Lily beamed. You're really smart for a fancy lady. Lily, David warned gently, but Sophia was laughing again. I like her, Sophia said to David. She says what she thinks. Sometimes too much, David replied, but there was affection in his voice. He returned to the diagnostic computer, frowning at the readout. Looks like your fuel pump died. It's not a cheap fix, I'm afraid. Probably looking at $800 for parts and labor. Sophia nodded as if $800 was pocket change. How long will it take? I can order the part tomorrow, have it installed by end of day. That work for you? That's fine. I'll call a cab. She pulled out her phone, then paused. Actually, would you mind if I waited here for a few minutes? I have some calls to make, and this seems like a peaceful place to make them. David glanced around his modest garage with its oil-stained floors and second-hand equipment. Peaceful wasn't usually how people described it, but he nodded. Sure. There's a folding chair in the office if you want some privacy. Thank you. Sophia settled into the chair David indicated and pulled out her phone. As she began to dial, David caught fragments of her conversation. Corporate merger, board meeting, revenue projections. The words seemed to create an invisible barrier around her, transforming her back into the polished businesswoman who had first walked through his door. Lily, however, seemed unimpressed by this transformation. She wandered over to where Sophia sat and announced, My dad could probably fix anything. He fixed my bike when the chain came off, and he fixed our toaster when it started smoking, and one time he even fixed Mrs. Garcia's fence when the wind blew it down. Sophia lowered her phone. Sounds like your dad is pretty amazing. He is, Lily said with absolute certainty. He makes the best pancakes, too. He puts chocolate chips in them, but only on Sundays because he says chocolate for breakfast should be special. That sounds wonderful, Sophia said, and there was something wistful in her voice. Don't you have pancakes at your house? Sophia considered this question seriously. I usually have meetings on Sunday mornings, or I'm traveling for work. That's sad, Lily pronounced. Everyone should have pancakes on Sunday. Before Sophia could respond, David called from beneath the hood of another car. Lily, come help me hold this flashlight, would you? Lily skipped over to her father, and Sophia watched their easy interaction with something that looked like hunger. David patiently showed Lily how to angle the light, praising her when she got it right, and gently correcting her when she didn't. Their conversation was punctuated by Lily's questions about how engines worked and David's simplified but accurate explanations. The spark plugs make little explosions, David was saying, and those explosions push the pistons, and the pistons make the wheels turn. Like fireworks in the car? Lily asked. Exactly like that. very tiny, very controlled fireworks. Sophia found herself drawn into their world, temporarily forgetting about the conference call she was supposed to join in 10 minutes. There was something about the way David explained things to his daughter, patient and thorough, but never condescending, that reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. And Lily's questions were so genuine, so full of wonder about how things worked. "Ma'am?" David's voice broke through her reverie. "Your cab's here." Sophia looked up to see a yellow taxi idling outside the garage. She stood quickly, smoothing her blazer. "Thank you. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon to pick up the car." "It'll be ready," David assured her. As Sophia walked toward the door, Lily called after her. "Bye, Sophia. I hope you get to have pancakes soon." Sophia paused at the threshold and turned back. "I hope so too, Lily." The next morning brought an unusual customer to Carter's auto repair. Margaret Thompson, known to everyone in the neighborhood as Miss Maggie, rarely left her small house 3 blocks away, except for grocery shopping and her weekly trip to the library. At 82, she moved slowly, but with determination, her silver hair always perfectly curled and her cardigan always buttoned to the neck, regardless of the weather. David looked up from his work as she approached the garage, surprised to see her so far from home. "Morning, Miss Maggie. Everything all right?" "Good morning, David, dear," she said, slightly out of breath from the walk. "I was wondering if you might take a look at my old Buick. She's been making some terrible noises." "Of course. Want me to come take a look this afternoon?" "Oh, that would be wonderful. But there's something else I wanted to talk to you about." Miss Maggie glanced around the garage, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "I heard through the grapevine that you had an interesting visitor yesterday." David grinned. In a neighborhood like theirs, news traveled faster than the internet. "Let me guess. Mrs. Patterson told Mrs. Chen, who told Mr. Rodriguez, who told you." "Something like that," Miss Maggie admitted with a twinkle in her eye. "They said she was quite elegant, expensive car. Mercedes. Fuel pump went out." Miss Maggie seemed to be working up to something. What did she look like, this elegant woman? David found the question oddly specific. Dark hair, probably late 50s. Professional type. Why? Miss Maggie's expression grew thoughtful. "Oh, no reason. Just curious about who finds their way to our little corner of the world." She paused, studying David's face with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "You know, dear, you have such distinctive eyes. That unusual shade of blue. I don't think I've ever seen eyes quite like yours." Before David could respond to this unexpected observation, the bell above the door chimed again. Sophia Wellington walked in, looking just as polished as she had the day before, but somehow less imposing. Maybe it was the slight smile on her face, or the way she immediately looked toward the corner where Lily had been sitting. "Miss Wellington," David said, "car's all set. Let me get your keys." As he turned toward the office, he missed the way Miss Maggie's face went completely white. The elderly woman gripped the edge of the workbench, staring at Sophia with an expression of shock that bordered on recognition. Her lips moved silently, as if she were trying to work out a problem that didn't quite make sense. Sophia, meanwhile, was looking around the garage with obvious disappointment. "Is Lily at school?" "Yeah, she catches the bus at 7:30. You seem to make quite an impression on her. She spent half the evening talking about the fancy lady who knew math." "She made an impression on me too," Sophia said softly. "She's a remarkable child. You should be very proud." "I am." David handed her the keys and the invoice. "That's $750. I found a rebuilt pump instead of new. Saved you some money." Sophia looked at the bill with surprise. "You didn't have to do that. Quality's the same, and it comes with the same warranty. No point in you paying extra if you don't need to." As Sophia reached for her wallet, Miss Maggie stepped forward. She had recovered some of her composure, but her eyes remained fixed on Sophia's face with laser-like intensity. "Excuse me, dear." Miss Maggie said in her sweetest voice. "I don't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help overhearing. Wellington, did you say? That's not a common name around here." Sophia turned to face the elderly woman, and David noticed that both women seemed to be studying each other with unusual care. "No, I suppose it's not. I'm Sophia Wellington." "Wellington," Miss Maggie repeated slowly. "Are you by any chance related to the Wellington Industries family?" "I'm the CEO, actually." Miss Maggie nodded, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "I see. And have you lived in the city long?" "About 20 years," Sophia replied, clearly puzzled by the line of questioning. 20 years? Miss Maggie mused. "That's interesting. You know, I had a dear friend many years ago. Sweet boy, really. His last name was Wellington, too. Michael Wellington. You wouldn't happen to know." The change in Sophia was instantaneous and dramatic. The color drained from her face, and she gripped the edge of David's workbench for support. "Michael," she whispered. "Oh my," Miss Maggie said, her voice full of sympathy. "I can see that name means something to you." "He was my son," Sophia said quietly. "He died 15 years ago." The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the tick of the old clock on the wall. David found himself caught between two women who were clearly sharing a moment of profound significance, though he couldn't understand what it was about. Miss Maggie reached out and gently touched Sophia's arm. "I'm so sorry for your loss, dear. Michael was a wonderful young man. I knew him quite well during his last year." Sophia looked up sharply. "You knew Michael?" "Oh, yes. He spent a lot of time in this neighborhood that last year. He was troubled about something. Family pressures, I think. He used to come by my house sometimes just to talk. I made him tea and listened." Miss Maggie's eyes grew distant with memory. "He was searching for something, though I was never quite sure what." David watched this exchange with growing confusion. The coincidence seemed almost impossible. What were the odds that this wealthy woman's dead son had known Miss Maggie? And why did Miss Maggie seem so interested in making this connection? "What was he searching for?" Sophia asked, her voice barely audible. Miss Maggie hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I think he was trying to figure out who he wanted to be outside of his family's expectations. He talked about wanting a simple life, a real life. He said he felt like he was living someone else's dream." Sophia closed her eyes, pain flickering across her features. "I pushed him too hard. I thought I was preparing him to take over the company, but I was just pushing him away." "He loved you," Miss Maggie said gently. "He talked about you often, but he also felt like he couldn't live up to what you wanted him to be." "I just wanted him to be successful. I wanted him to have everything." "I know, dear, but Michael wanted something different. He wanted to matter to someone, not because of his name or his money, but because of who he was as a person." David shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in this intimate conversation. But something about Miss Maggie's questions, the intensity of her focus on both him and Sophia, suggested that this wasn't entirely coincidental. "Miss Maggie," he said carefully, "did you know I was going to be here when you came by today?" The elderly woman looked at him with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "I had a feeling you might be. Yes." "And you knew Miss Wellington would be here too?" "I suspected she might return for her car, yes." Sophia looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "I don't understand. What's going on?" Miss Maggie took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something difficult. "There's something I need to tell you both. Something I probably should have said years ago, but I wasn't sure and I thought, well, I thought it might be better to let sleeping dogs lie." The garage seemed to hold its breath. David felt a chill run down his spine, though he couldn't say why. Sophia's face had gone pale again, and she was gripping the workbench so tightly her knuckles were white. "What is it?" Sophia whispered. Miss Maggie looked at David, then at Sophia, then back at David. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "David, dear, would you mind telling me your birthday?" "My birthday?" David frowned. "October 15th, 1987. Why?" Miss Maggie nodded slowly. "And your mother's name?" "Sarah Carter. But she died when I was 12. Miss Maggie, I don't understand what this has to do with anything." "What about your father?" David's expression hardened slightly. "Never knew him. Mom said he left before I was born. What does this have to do with Miss Wellington's son?" Miss Maggie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between David and Sophia as if she were solving a puzzle. Finally, she spoke. "David, I think you should sit down." "I'm fine standing." "Please, dear, sit down." Something in her tone made David comply. He perched on the edge of a workbench, suddenly feeling like the garage had become too small, the air too thin. Miss Maggie turned to Sophia. "You said Michael died 15 years ago." "Yes. Car accident. He was driving back from—" Sophia trailed off, her eyes widening. "He was driving back from somewhere he wouldn't tell me about. Somewhere he'd been going regularly for months. I never found out where." "He was coming back from visiting Sarah Carter," Miss Maggie said quietly. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David felt the world tilt slightly, as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted. Sophia made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "I don't understand," David said, though part of him was beginning to, and that part was filling him with a cold dread. Miss Maggie moved closer to him, her eyes soft with compassion. "Your mother was a lovely girl, David. She worked at the diner downtown, the one that used to be on 5th Street. Michael met her there during his senior year of college. He was trying to be someone different, someone normal. He'd go there for coffee and pie, and they started talking." "No," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They fell in love," Miss Maggie continued. "Real love, the kind that doesn't care about money or social class. Sarah knew who he was, but she didn't care. And Michael found in her everything he'd been looking for, someone who loved him for himself." Sophia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "He never told me." "He was going to," Miss Maggie said. "He came to me the week before he died. He said he was going to tell you about Sarah, about the baby. He said he was ready to disappoint you if it meant being happy." David stood up abruptly, pacing to the other side of the garage. "This is insane. My father was just some guy who took off. He wasn't—" "Look in the mirror, David," Miss Maggie said gently. "Look at your eyes." Despite himself, David found his gaze drawn to the reflection in the window of the office door. His eyes stared back at him, that unusual shade of blue that people sometimes commented on, the color that had always made him slightly different from everyone else he knew. Slowly, he turned to look at Sophia. Her eyes were the same color. "Oh God," Sophia breathed. "Oh my God." Miss Maggie reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age. "I found this in Sarah's things after she passed. She gave it to me for safekeeping, said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure you got it when you were old enough." She handed the photograph to David with trembling fingers. It showed a young woman with blonde hair and green eyes, laughing at something off camera. Beside her stood a young man with dark hair and blue eyes that were unmistakably familiar. At the bottom, in his mother's careful handwriting, were the words, "Michael and me, 2 weeks before we found out about the baby. The happiest day of my life." David's legs gave out. He sank onto a nearby stool, the photograph shaking in his hands. The young man in the picture looked exactly like David had looked at 25. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. "He died not knowing," Miss Maggie said softly. "Sarah was going to tell him about the pregnancy the weekend he was killed. She was 3 months along and just starting to show." Sophia made a choking sound and collapsed into the folding chair, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "She never tried to contact you," Miss Maggie said to Sophia. "She thought it would be better to let you grieve Michael without the complication of a grandchild you'd never wanted." "Never wanted?" Sophia looked up, her face streaked with tears. I would have loved." "She didn't know that," Miss Maggie said gently. "All she knew was that Michael felt like he could never measure up to your expectations. She thought a baby would just be another disappointment." David stared at the photograph, trying to process what he was being told. His father hadn't abandoned him. His father had died before he was born, rushing back from a secret relationship to tell his wealthy mother about the life he wanted to build. And that wealthy mother was sitting 10 feet away from him, crying for the son she'd lost, and the grandson she'd never known she had. "I don't know what to do with this," David said finally. Sophia looked up at him, her face raw with emotion. "I don't either." They stared at each other across the garage, two strangers who were suddenly family, two lives that had been shaped by the same tragedy in completely different ways. David saw his own eyes looking back at him, his own stubborn chin, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something. "You're my grandmother," he said, testing the words. "I'm your grandmother," Sophia whispered. Miss Maggie watched them both with the satisfied expression of someone who had carried a burden for far too long and was finally free of it. "I probably should have told you years ago, David, but Sarah made me promise to wait until you were settled, until you had your own life figured out. She didn't want you growing up feeling like you had to live up to the Wellington name." "She was protecting me," David realized. "She was protecting you both," Miss Maggie said, glancing at Sophia. "She knew that losing Michael nearly destroyed you. She thought learning about David might make it worse. Not better." The silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of might-have-beens and what-ifs. Finally, Sophia spoke. "Can I—" she started, then stopped, looking uncertain for the first time since David had met her. "Can I ask you about him? About Michael's son?" David looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had intimidated him yesterday was now asking permission to know about his life, about the grandson she'd never had the chance to meet. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Sophia said simply. "I want to know everything." So David told her. He told her about growing up with a mother who worked 2 jobs but never missed a school play, about learning to fix things because they couldn't afford to replace them, about Sarah's gentle way of explaining difficult things and her fierce protectiveness when the world got too harsh. He told her about the scholarship that got him through high school, the automotive program at the community college, meeting Jessica at a church social and falling in love with her laugh, about their wedding in Miss Maggie's backyard and the way Jessica had transformed his small world into something bright and full of possibility. He told her about Lily's birth, how holding his daughter for the first time had made him understand what his mother must have felt, the overwhelming need to protect and provide. About Jessica's illness, the 2 years of treatments and hope, and gradual acceptance that love wasn't always enough to keep someone safe. "She would have loved this place," David said, gesturing around the garage. "Jess always said I was happiest when I was fixing things." Sophia listened to every word, occasionally asking gentle questions, but mostly just absorbing the story of the life her son's child had built. When David finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He sounds just like Michael," she said finally. "When he was little, he used to take apart his toys just to see how they worked. I was always worried he'd become an engineer instead of taking over the company." She laughed softly, but it was tinged with sadness. "I wish I'd let him." "Maybe he would have ended up doing something like this," David said, surprising himself with the offer of comfort. "Maybe he would have." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I made so many mistakes with him. I was so afraid he wouldn't be strong enough to handle the business world that I forgot to ask if he even wanted to." "Sounds like he knew you loved him, though. That's what matters." "Did your mother tell you that? That your father loved you?" David nodded. "She said he would have been proud of me. She used to say I had his hands, good for building things and fixing what was broken." Sophia looked down at David's oil-stained fingers, seeing in them an echo of the boy who used to build elaborate structures with his blocks and then carefully disassemble them to start over. "I don't know how to do this," Sophia admitted. "I don't know how to be a grandmother." "I don't know how to have one," David replied. "But maybe we could figure it out together." The garage door chimed, and Lily burst through, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward her father. "Dad, you won't believe what happened at school today. Tommy Peterson said his dad could fix anything, but I told him my dad was way better because you fixed Mrs. Garcia's fence, and her feelings at the same time because she was really sad about—" She stopped mid-sentence, noticing Sophia sitting in the corner with red-rimmed eyes and a tear-stained face. "Hi, Sophia," Lily said, her voice instantly softer. "Are you okay? You look sad." Sophia looked at this bright, caring child who was her great-granddaughter and felt her heart crack open in a way she hadn't experienced since Michael was small. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Sophia said. "I just found out some news that was sad and happy at the same time." Lily considered this seriously. "Like when we had to put Mrs. Chen's cat to sleep, but then she got a new kitten? Something like that." Lily walked over to Sophia and, without hesitation, climbed into her lap. "Sometimes when I'm sad and happy together, Dad makes hot chocolate. It helps with the confused feelings." Sophia's arms came around the little girl automatically, and she found herself marveling at the weight and warmth of her, the way she smelled like crayons and playground sand, and something indefinably sweet. "That sounds like very good advice," Sophia managed. David watched his daughter comfort this stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore, and felt something shift inside his chest. Lily had always had an instinct for people who needed care, but seeing her with Sophia felt different somehow. Natural, like they belonged together. "Dad," Lily said, looking over at him, "can Sophia come to dinner? I think she might be lonely." David met Sophia's eyes over his daughter's head. "Would you like to stay for dinner? I should warn you it's probably not what you're used to. Spaghetti and meatballs." "I would love that," Sophia said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in years. As the afternoon wore on, the garage transformed from a place of business into something more intimate. Miss Maggie stayed too, claiming she wanted to make sure her old Buick was running properly, but really wanting to witness the family she had helped create. David found himself talking more than he had in months, sharing stories about Lily's latest adventures and the characters who frequented his garage. Sophia, meanwhile, seemed to shed years as the afternoon progressed. She helped Lily with her homework, patiently explaining fractions in a way that made the little girl giggle with understanding. She asked intelligent questions about David's work and seemed genuinely interested in the intricacies of automotive repair. "You're different than I thought," Lily announced as they prepared to walk to David's small apartment above the garage. "Different how?" Sophia asked. "When you first came here, you seemed like the kind of grown-up who doesn't remember what it's like to be a kid. But you do remember, don't you? Sophia paused, considering the question seriously. I think I forgot for a while, but being here with you and your dad is helping me remember. The apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that spoke of a life fully lived. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, and books were stacked on every available surface. The furniture was obviously second-hand, but everything was clean and well-maintained. Sophia found herself studying everything with the intensity of someone discovering a foreign culture. This was how her son might have lived if he'd had the chance to choose his own path. Simple, honest, focused on relationships rather than achievements. Dinner was a revelation. Not because the food was extraordinary, though David's spaghetti sauce was surprisingly good, but because of the conversation. Lily chatted about her day, asking Sophia dozens of questions about her life and work. Sophia found herself describing board meetings and business negotiations in terms a 7-year-old could understand, and discovering that some of the corporate world's most sacred concepts sounded rather silly when explained to a child. So, you're the boss of the whole company? Lily asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork with determination. I am. Do you like being the boss? Sophia considered this question, perhaps for the first time in her adult life. I thought I did. But sitting here with you and your dad, I'm realizing that being the boss might not be the same thing as being happy. Dad says happiness isn't a place you get to. It's something you build with the people you love, Lily said matter-of-factly. David looked embarrassed. I say a lot of things. You say smart things, Lily insisted. Then to Sophia. Do you have people you love? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Sophia realized that she couldn't answer it, not honestly. She had employees and board members and business associates. She had people who depended on her and people who wanted things from her. But love? When was the last time she had told someone she loved them and meant it? When was the last time someone had said it to her? I'm not sure I do, Sophia admitted quietly. Lily considered this with the seriousness of a child who had never known life without love. Well, you could have us, if you wanted. We're good at loving people. The simplicity of the offer brought tears to Sophia's eyes. This little girl, who had known her for exactly 2 days, was offering her a place in their family as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I would like that very much, Sophia whispered. After dinner, as they sat in the small living room with cups of hot chocolate that Lily had insisted on making herself, Sophia found herself looking at the walls covered with photographs. David and Jessica's wedding, Lily's first steps, birthday parties and Christmas mornings, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that someone had thought worth preserving. You have a beautiful life here, she said to David. It's not much, but it's ours. No, Sophia said firmly. It's everything. This is what Michael was looking for, this sense of belonging, of being loved for who you are rather than what you achieve. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to David. What's this? My personal phone number. I know this is all very sudden and overwhelming. I don't want to impose on your life or try to change anything about how you're raising Lily. But if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your family. However that looks, whatever that means. David studied the card, then looked at this woman who was his grandmother, his father's mother, the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. I think I'd like that too, he said. Lily, who had been listening to this exchange with the patience of someone much older than 7, suddenly brightened. Does this mean you're our grandma now? Sophia's breath caught. If it's okay with your dad, I would love to be your grandma. It's okay with me, David said. More than okay. Lily launched herself at Sophia with the enthusiasm that only children can muster, wrapping her arms around the woman's neck and hugging her fiercely. "I've never had a grandma before," Lily said into Sophia's shoulder. "This is the best day ever." As Sophia held her great-granddaughter and looked across the room at her grandson, she realized that Lily was right. Despite the tears and the shock and the painful revelations about missed opportunities, this was indeed the best day she'd had in 15 years. Outside, the sun was setting over the neighborhood where Michael had once found love, and where his son was now building the kind of life Michael had dreamed of. Inside the small apartment above Carter's auto repair, 3 generations of a family were learning how to be together, connected not by obligation or expectation, but by the simple revolutionary act of choosing to love each other. The future stretched ahead of them, full of Sunday morning pancakes and birthday parties, and the quiet satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. It wasn't the life Sophia had planned, but it was exactly the life she had always needed. And for the first time since Michael's death, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow. Miss Maggie, walking slowly home in the gathering dusk, smiled to herself and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Sometimes the best families were the ones that found each other against all odds, built on love rather than blood, strengthened by choice rather than chance. Tonight, she had helped create exactly that kind of family. Tonight, everyone was finally home,